Four people. Yeah.
All pods, please check in with the Scrum pod right now so that we can start to organize for our MVP demonstration.
So I think the GitHub has been updated.
Mhm.
Okay. Have y'all had friends or on it?
So let's see here. Last we left off from last class, we know that we have the client side that was working. We had a proof of concept that was actually illustrated there, and we had the backend server. Have we had a chance to integrate our backend to our client side yet, and with our database?
The database people sort of
Okay, let's see here. Where do we want to start with the presentations then? Do we want to do client side or server side? Who has their computer ready? Bring it up. Are you inside the Zoom already?
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, yeah, I see you. Make you a co-host. Perfect. Let's get this power on.
Did I stream?
Just share your screen so that that way we can record our first illustration of our MVP.
Okay. So the basic skeleton for the API is ready. It's not, well, the main is diverged now, so I will go, which one was it? This one. Check out my branch. Okay, so let's hope it works. The only thing you actually have to do is just type in, I actually have it somewhere in the README, because I can never remember the, so you just have to type in this here. Let's hope it works. Looks good. Okay. Let's just check here, services. Both things are running. Okay, now we just go to localhost 8000 docs. And then we have our API. We can, well, let me first check if we have a user already. That's the test thing, that's the actual thing. Okay, we have one user, named user.example.com. So now we will actually see now that we cannot create a user with the email user@example.com because this one already exists. So we can execute that, and we get this already. Tried it with a different mail. So let's go with user2 and let's execute that. code 201, so it was successfully created. Now we can log in, user2@example.com. So now we're logged in. And this year, this is a restricted endpoint, so you can only get it working when you're logged in. Now we are, so we can just execute that and we get back our email. So that's the basic thing which I implemented. So I don't know how much I should go into the details, but basically we have a backend, and the main things are API, handler, and database. So the API, you will see you have a bunch of different APIs. So this is just this is separating the API stuff from everything else. So here you find the paths, the links basically, and what the API needs, what it returns, and so on. And then you just forward that stuff to the user handler. That's at least what I call it. And there everything else will happen. So basically the higher logic and the lower logic will go to a thing called user service, or the service in general, which basically interacts with the database, and creates everything. So basically, with that, we also have this separation of concerns, that API is separated from the, let's say, higher logic, separated from the database. So that's one thing. And another thing is I started doing that today, and those are tests. So basically, we have now a test framework, and we can run the tests. And you see test passed, it was successful. So we successfully created a user in the tests, and we successfully retrieved the user. Yeah, so basically there are a couple problems right now. So number one is some very stupid Python stuff, because right now we basically import everything from database. So we need to have the working directory of Python set to this database, which causes problems if you want to call fast API in the terminal on it. So I don't know how to start fast, like all the stuff from the terminal. I can do it in PyCharm, because there I can set the working directory, but I just couldn't figure out how to do that. So basically what we need to do is just refactor that, and so that basically there is a backend in front of here that will, I think, solve the problems. Yeah, that's the main issue so far. It's working. So yeah, what I think I want to do now is, first off, make a pipeline so that the tests run automatically when you push it, so you see if it was successful or not. And second thing is, we can actually already establish a production server and push it there somehow. Yeah, those are the things.
So then we have the login system built, and we have an API that the clients can go ahead and send requests to.
Yeah, so right now it's not on the server. So what you have to do right now, if you want to interact with the API, is you clone the repo and you run the Docker command I showed you. That should be it. Nothing else is needed. And at some point we will probably have it on our Raspberry Pi, and then you can call the Raspberry Pi thing directly. Yeah. And so far we have a login API, create user, and like get user with the email. So far it's very early stage. So all the schemas you have to put into, so like the user schema, what does the create user endpoint expect, will change, because so far it's just the user email and the password. So probably we'll have first name, last name, whatever coming up. It's not there right now, but I believe it will get added at some point.
No, right now, everything's just on the back end where you're sending requests. So do you need a front end set of views to be able to go ahead and create a user account or to have a privileged login view?
Uh, I don't really get the question, but basically you just need to submit your HTTP requests in the correct form and then it will work. So since I don't know how the front end will look like, I also went ahead and figured out how to do all of this stuff with curl. So basically, like the challenging thing is that sort of each endpoint will expect a different type of input. So if you create a user, you will want to send it as JSON. So that I figured out with ChatGPT. I wouldn't know otherwise. The login expects a request form like this as foreign data, and then if you want to get the user, then you want to send the token which you got from the login request in the header. It's just how stuff works. I didn't come up with that. Yeah.
So we just need a front end page so that we don't have to do the curl to be able to interface with you at the server then. So we'll have to, I don't know if we have a pod currently working on the login page. So that's going to definitely be something that has to happen almost immediately so that we can create a login page that sends a request to that endpoint and then allows you to either create or log into a pre-existing account.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to make it clear, how login works is you call this login endpoint, and then you get a token back. And with this token, you can access restricted endpoints. Restricted endpoints mean sort of you can only use them if you're logged in. What logged in means is that you have this information, this token, which you then send to the requested and restricted endpoint.
And so right now your backend server, is that interfacing with Pod4's database?
More or less. I mean, yes, it is, but on an earlier version. So because I saw you did some changes, so now it wouldn't work anymore. But yeah, it works.
Excellent.
I wanted to ask, just to throw it out there, when you were talking about you're having issues with like a workers directory and like even the way that Python works, yada yada yada. Is there anything that you can do with like an environment like path, like a search environment path stuff? Do you know what they interface with any of those?
I don't know. I already had a .environment file here, so I tried to set it there. It didn't work. I don't know what to do because here it's now I have this thing. Here it's just very convenient. You can just edit configuration, and then you can just set the working directory. That's it. I don't like. You can do that if you execute pure Python. You can do that in the terminal too with a command, but I don't know how do you do that with Fast API because I couldn't figure it out because there it's not a pure Python command. You will either run Fast API something or UVcon something. Yeah. So if we just refactor that, I believe we will work properly.
Excellent. Is there any other questions? So the documentation for the API, is that listed inside of where's the documentation
So
posted at?
the documentation, you can get it. So you go to you run it, you go to the docs, and then here you can click here, and that is the whole documentation. It's a bit well, I mean, it's automatically generated, but everything you need should be in there, and I believe ChatGPT will help you understand it. Other than that, of course, feel free to ask questions. Or just take a look at this here.
Can we just scroll down just to see? Okay, so you have your users, you have login. And keep scrolling down.
That's
Or is
it.
that it? Okay. So then we're gonna have to make some very specific API calls for our client side. So we'll start having to expand what the API can do. Right now, it's just used for logging in. But once you're logged in as a authenticated user, as an admin, we're going to want to be able to push changes to our kiosk and whatnot. So we're going to have to support all that inside of our server side implementation. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we do have a user authentication system that's not just logging into the Raspberry Pi. That's a big upgrade. Let's see here. Do we have, in terms of highlighting what our MVP build is going to have to do once we start integrating our code together, the client side, has there been any gains, any improvements on getting the client side up and running? Let's see, I know we had some demonstrations last class. Was it from pod? Was it pod 7 and pod 6 who did the demonstrations? Yeah. No, yeah, I do. Okay, let me get the lights back on. So let's talk about what we need to do to integrate for MVP then. So we have all been working on individual assignments, but now it's time to get our code to come together, right? That's what we want to have by the end of today's lecture. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. So we have our client side code. We have our server side code.
Better marker if you want.
Okay. Oh, that's much better. Okay, and then we're going to have our database. Okay, let's talk about what we need to start integrating these various disparate systems together. So right now, server side, what do we have? We have, well, we can do we have a login system, right? So we have a user system. Now, it's not really set up to do much at the moment, right? You can create accounts, you can log into the accounts, but presumably once you're logged in, it's going to have to do actions, right? You're going to want to have roles, tasks that you can do in a as a admin or as an authenticated user. Let's talk about our client side. That'll kind of motivate what has to get integrated to our server side, right? So in the actual kiosk itself, right? So we already have our code that's pushed for being able to render our windowing system. And that interfaces with the Leap Motion. We saw this last class, right? So, does everyone remember what the goal of the MVP build is in terms of the functionality? What does it have to do? So it's gonna have, yeah, so it's gonna have a main view. And then we mentioned how many sub views that you're gonna have. So you have your main menu, and then from that, we said 2. And what are our sub menus? Yeah, let's just do let's just say research and tutor. All right, we already have something that can effectively do that, right? In terms of the what's that?
The slideshow, you're talking about the slideshow?
Well, not the slideshow, but to have a main menu.
Oh.
This task is done, right? And so then we can direct to the submenus. Where are we currently with the submenus? Yeah, this is gonna be a subsystem in itself, but right now it could just be an image, right? So we probably use the same kind of logic for our main menu to display our submenus. Okay, but now the question is, where are the images that's going to be hosted in these subviews coming from, right? They're going to have to come from our server, right? So we're going to have to make a request. So when we select on a submenu, you're going to have to make a request to the server, and the server is then going to have to provide that back to the client. How close is the server in terms of the functionality? Do we have an implementation for that yet? It looks like the server just does user authentication, right?
Or it's just user creation.
So this communication between our client or servers are going to be a pretty big deal for this MVP build.
So what our database group is doing with our tables, we're trying to establish relationships so that instead of having to write, we're using SQL Alchemy and Python. And instead of having to write joins and what have you to get all of these child tables communicating with the parent tables, like for instance, we have a booking table that a tutor could access or a room could access, because we don't want to repeat that functionality of having something that you're booking. I think you had talked about that before. So instead of having to join on those tables, we have these relationships established in Python where you could just do, for instance, booking or room dot booking to see all of the booking records for that. So that when Peter does his API, or he writes his API, he won't have to do the query thingy in SQL Alchemy. He could just use that Python variable, that object, to access stuff. So that should help speed things along as far as what he needs to create for them to query or set information.
Okay, let's yeah, y'all have done a very good job in designing the schema for
We
sure.
can show you, he has a schema set up where we could show how all the tables.
You have that ready to be presented? Come on up.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go grab it.
So you're using MySQL for this.
Postgres.
Postgres? What's the main difference in Postgres or down?
I'm not too aware of the differences. I think they're mostly similar. You know, Postgres and
They're really kind of bypass. That's what all out.
Thank you, sir.
SQL part, because it's kind of making an object out of, it's abstraction out the SQL so that you can treat.
should I also share my screen?
Yeah, you can share it.
SQL like,
That way I can see it on here too.
And instead of doing the insert blah, 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 you could just do dot, pen dot, whatever, it's, like, so it takes whatever backend that you want. So we could switch to a different backend in a moment that
They could get the
our code.
but they usually take a bit.
I mean, I think I'm seeing it, right?
We're not using.
We got, what's going on?
I think the new.
That was easy.
Maybe we could just show them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we can show.
Makes it easy.
Nice. Okay. So what she mentioned before, Layla, is that we have this DB classes. So basically in SQL Alchemy, instead of having to make like tables through SQL queries and all that kind of stuff, it allows us to use Python code. So we have a bunch of classes for each table. We have like the user table. It's a bit different from what the API group showed, because we changed it like this morning. We were just like looking back at the stuff and making sure it has whatever we need. So we have like user ID and email, first name, last name, password. We'll probably have to hash the passwords later, but for now it's just like plain text. And we have, oh, they are hashed now? Yes. Thank you. Okay, nice. So then we have like the relationships. This is for like foreign keys. We didn't really know about this before, but we like looked it up and we found out there's like relationships in SQL Alchemy. This is what Layla was mentioning. So that instead of using like queries every time, we could use, yeah, queries and join tables and all that kind of stuff. We could use like, I think we had something like that in main. This is still like just figuring things out in here, but we kind of had like for user and users, and then we could get user.user first and all that kind of stuff. But we're able to like get the connected information between the two just because we have like these connections or these relationships. So then we have role, which lists out all the roles with their IDs and names and descriptions. And then there's user role, which is really what connects the users and the roles. So you see, you just take the user ID, basically the primary key of the user, and then the primary key of the role, which is the role ID, you put them together. And then, so basically whenever you have that user, it's connected to that role, or the other way around, or vice versa. So we also have tags. This was I know pod one sent that GitHub page where you have like your name, email for the image requests, and also had a bunch of tags. So this is for those tags, like the different clubs there are, like AC. I forgot what it stands for, but yeah, there's also web dev, all those other kinds of stuff. So this is just like a table to hold those kinds of things. So we have an ID, as always, a name and a description, and again, a relationship with images. Then we have an image. We mostly just have the image link in this one. But we also have relationship with similar tables like image tag. That's similar to user roles, what we mentioned before. So it connects the image link with the tag ID. So then we can give that image more than one tag. So if it's like for more than one group or club or whatever, they're all connected in there. So then we have classroom. That's for, I guess, the kinds of rooms we might want to like use for booking or tutoring or whatever else we might need to use them for. And there's like a Boolean, squiggly, because when I merged, I forgot to add back the import Boolean, fix that. So then room number, that just like we go through all the room numbers probably in this building. I'm not sure if we're gonna include other buildings. I don't remember what we agreed to there. But yeah, then room available, just Booleans. Another relationship with bookings. There's booking type, which has an ID, name, description, kind of familiar. And then booking itself uses the booking ID, it uses the booking type ID from that table we just looked at. Start date, end date. And we have them as date times. So there's that. And then booking user ID, we go to the user table, relationships. And there's booking room, which has like foreign key relations. I think it's similar to what we've looked at before, but it also has its own ID for the room. Then image request. I think this is the one that actually fits into that demo pod one showed with it has the name and email, then a message and the link or the path, and then start date and end date. So we have a lot of that stuff. And yeah, so we should be able to get a lot of that information for that page. And then there's club. So we can add clubs and add their upcoming activities and all that kind of stuff. And then a request. So we can request to add a new club, something like that. And that's all we have like for the tables. And now there was like something I used, a library that makes like diagrams. So let me try to find the data diagram. Right here. So we just open it in like Google Chrome, and it shows all the tables like how I mentioned them before. So just a bit easier to like visualize. Since we don't have something like IntelliJ or DataGrip that just automatically does it, I just use the library to do it. That's generally what we have. And then, yeah, I mean, we tried with some inserts, but these are just like samples. And then in main, as I mentioned before, this is how we were able to connect them. We just use like user and users, and then we just printed out all the roles for a user. So
Yeah, if we didn't have that, utilize that relationship construct, we would have to do like some kind of join in SQL alchemy to join the user table to the user role table, and then join the user role table to the role table, and you would have like 3 joins. But by doing this relationship, we can specify a secondary table to be that like join table, and you can actually get the data you want instead of that data that just holds the foreign key. The foreign keys of both the user and the role. So it will make the API team's job easier, because they don't need to know what tables they need to join with to get our data to write the APIs. They could just do dot roles and get all the roles, or dot. They don't have to do that hopping. So we think that should speed up things a lot more with our relationships that we have set up. It's kind of like you're making a big table that has everything all in it, as opposed to jumping here and skipping there.
Excellent. So what I can tell is that you all have thought very deeply throughout the number of conversations we've had while laying out the specifications to have your database be able to manage all the data. It looks like the next big thing that has to happen, though, for us to realize the MVP build is for the server to fully integrate itself to the database so that you can actually go ahead and create those records or go ahead and be able to query for those records, right? So right now we have a database that manages all the data, but we need our server to be able to interface with the database to actually create and store and access the data that your database is now capable of, right? That's a big thing we have to do next. So we have to.
We could have a front end or some kind of web page input for ballot rooms or all of these different tables that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because the server, just because it's a server, right? The server is going to have a front end view for the authenticated user. So right now, all of the instructions that are being issued to the server are via through like curl commands, right? We need a front end that can interface with the server and send those requests so that there's a front end perspective for the user. Because you don't want the user to have to be able to like operate from the command line to interface with your web server. We should have a nice front end view for being able to log in. And then once you've logged in, then to be able to access your views like manage the images or whatever other task the administrator of our application is going to be doing, right? So it's not just being able to integrate the database functionality we have to the server that we have. We'll call this bare bones. But we also need to go ahead and, I'm sorry, I'm writing this down because it keeps me on point, not for you to read. You can just listen to what I'm saying. But okay, so we have to integrate the database to our server, but we also have to have the server have some front end view. Okay, let's talk about who can start working on these tasks then. Let's run through the task list. Let me of where we were at. Oh yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Let's see. I want to say that this was the most recent task list. I'll put this inside the chat here. Okay. So, leading up to the MVP build, we know the following. Pod 1 was working on the web form for the image submissions. And you were able to accomplish that?
Yes, I have a couple of GitHub pages that you post in our Discord. You can go there and run a server locally on your machine and kind of simulate how it works. You get as of right now, you just get a CSV file with the name, email, image paths, stuff like that. I have a demo.
Yep, bring it up. Oh, do you have a?
Let me just, oh, okay, you just. And screen share too.
Yeah.
Sure. So much crap in this one. So I'm gonna run the server. You see it created uploads and submissions file. The old Core i3 processor. So this is what it looks like blank. I got the start dates, end dates, tags, messages, email, name. I'll close that up before I run it. See. All right, so this is what the request form looks like currently. Before I just had name, email, message, and you can only select one image. But now you can select multiple images. I have the start date you can select now, which pops up with the calendar. Same thing with the end date. And now you can select tags. So if we just to show an example, my name is Jason. And then let's start it next Monday. And we just want it to run for the week. So we'll end it on next Friday. Already have a tag selected, so we're gonna go ahead and submit. And it failed to submit. Why did it fail to submit? I tested this right before I came up and it worked.
Always the thing with live demos.
I'm literally testing this all day. They tried starting the server over. Oh yeah, I did. I don't think our main image is required, but yeah, I did forget to select images. Okay, I'm so scared about what's gonna pop up. I'm just going to select a random Zoom background. I'm not going to scroll down any further just in case. I don't think I have anything bad. I just don't know what's. Dates. Okay. And I'll throw this one in there just for fun. So 3 files. And form submitted successfully. Nice. So now we go back to this directory, server, and now we can check our submissions. And this is just going to give you an idea of what the data is going to look like when it does go through. Ignore the start and end dates because Excel formats it as month, day, year, but on the back end it's year, month, day. And you can see I have my tags at the end separated, my message, and the image password is stored on the server, which would be in this folder. And there's a free images I selected. We kind of discussed some pain points I thought about in the process about the front end. Since it's a request form, I'm assuming we're going to have some type of admin looking at the request, seeing what the message was, seeing the images and approving it. And we're going to need some front end for that on the server side. What other pain points? I talked with Pod 4 last night about tables and databases and all. We're probably going to get that worked out this week.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
And for authentication, I want to ask the whole class, but especially you. Would it be how difficult would it be to get David to make like a request form.cs.uno form that you could sign in with your UNO email? That way we can set a group, like club leaders are approved to access that form. You think it's feasible?
It's probably better if we manage that ourselves.
All right.
So, well, we're gonna keep our application completely divorced from the rest of the university's database.
Makes sense. But it's pretty much all I have to show off for now. Yeah, but technically I could just technically go in there and write
you know, like whatever.
Yeah, I can literally just go. And then I think that would work, maybe. Laptops on this lesson. I actually haven't tested random emails, so I'm sure it'll go through and there's something stopping it. But just for
I mean,
let's see.
this is just for the submission form as well. So this goes towards flagging the administrators to approve this before it gets delivered to the kiosk.
Yeah, I believe whenever you submit this, it's gonna pop up on somewhere, and there's gonna be an admin that goes in and looks at the request and would approve or disapprove it.
Right, so either way, it's gonna go through another level.
Yeah.
Like human.
That's right. There's got to be some human oversight, right?
I was thinking about
I'm not super worried.
Well, I was more worried about somebody, just somehow the link getting out, somebody from, I don't know, Russia finds it, and all of a sudden we get spammed with 3 million requests. Which I doubt it will happen, but it's not impossible.
I mean, I guess. Depending, well. I mean, so you could issue some sort of like timeout, but then that would require having. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can make it IT based, I guess. With this way to figure it out.
Yeah, if that means I can't run a VPN or anything.
Yeah, so the submission form allows a public user to submit images to be displayed on the kiosk. So the next integration point for the submission forms then is to go ahead and send that data to the server, right, the web server, which can then take submissions and ready them for approval by the authenticated user, which would give us a rationale for having a login system and also be able to coordinate with the or connect to the database to actually house that data. Oh, yeah, for sure. You should have a view to see that manages all submissions.
Do we have a flag? Table that says approved or confirmed or whatever?
There should certainly be some kind of status on what an image currently, how it exists yet. Whether it's one that's part of the approved list or one that's that is pending.
I just figured out why it failed. I had the CSV open. You know, I put that as a note to not do.
That's both good and bad. Like, I'm going to just focus on the good process. If it isn't, if you get of somebody's project, for example, I think that would be my path.
You're talking about allowing submitting executable files onto the system? We will, let's just do images.
Yeah, I think I have it set up right now where it only accepts JPEGs, PNGs.
GIFs.
I think I do have GIFs.
Yeah, we
Is there a file size limit?
No, I'll go home and do that. Good call.
So now you guys are starting to understand why we're not gonna let you.
Yeah. I'm sorry to get the picture.
We have our own like Raspberry Pi ecosystem. We can do whatever we want on it. And we can see what results from that.
And it didn't close, that only affects us.
Yeah, yes.
And yeah, I do need to figure out how to validate that it is in a real email. So that
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go pod by pod because we need to make sure we have reassignments to ensure that our MVP is actually deployable, right? Right now, we have elements of our build that are there, but they need to be connected together. So the next set of tasks, so for pod one, then your submission form is done, but it seems like the next natural thing for pod one to focus on is to coordinate with the server itself to go ahead and have your server. Right now, you're hosting your own server, right? And then we have a server that's kind of in isolation. Integrate those two together.
All right.
There should be one unified server, and then you can start to integrate into that your web form submissions so that it can go towards our authenticated user. And so and then we're gonna need, let me make task lists here. So here, so I don't forget for myself. Okay, so here I mentioned we need to have the form go to the server. Again, this is for my own purpose, but then we're also gonna need a view, an admin view to view submissions. This will go to a pod today. We'll figure out which one in just a moment. So move your to-do from the GitHub pages into completed and assign that a new issue, which is going to be this particular task for yourself to go ahead. So your pod's new task is going to be to go ahead and have your submission form connect to the actual web server.
All right.
We will probably need more
Yes,
garbage.
I agree. Let's see, pod two, project documentation.
You don't want me.
So I'm documenting this now, but I finished the documentation for week 1 and week 2 since we're closing out progress. I don't know if you want me to show you, but I was just gonna say that for everyone to view on like what's to do next and like what has been done, there is also a folder of like the pictures everyone has submitted or some of the files for the most part.
Do you have your laptop? Can you? You need adapter?
No. Okay. All right, so if you go to the touchless kiosk, there's going to be the Capstone documentation. So this is where all the progress is being stored. So as you can see, this is some of the submissions that you guys put into the Discord chat. So as you can see, this is pod 4, kind of like a little bit of what they just showed. And then here's and then pod A, here are the images that they submitted as well. So if you want to go through all of this, but what has been, as you can see here, GitHub. So some of the resources are also attached to there, but these are just updates from every week. I guess I should change the title of this not to in progress because some of this is completed, but yeah. And I just finished up week 2 based on what we discussed today. So, but feel free to correct me if any of this is wrong. And now like week 3, just some of the things added to just now in the conversation.
Excellent.
But yeah. Ignore the preview for this, but thank you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, but anything that you guys add in the Discord chat of your progress is being added to that documentation. So.
Okay, so we have our ever evolving product documentation that's been going with each edition we've been making. Pod 3 is currently working on the tutoring schedule. And so what's the progress so far in terms of, not part of our actual MVP build, but what's been any new kind of identifications on how that subsystem might look? Okay, so let me think here. So pod 1. So if pod 1 migrates over to coordinating with the backend team to merge their servers together, then pod 2, pod 3. In terms of the tutoring schedule category implementation, I'm going to hold that in advance for a moment. Leap motion, advanced UI UX. Okay. Do we have pod 6 and 7?
Yeah, that's it.
And pod 7. Okay, so in terms of pivoting to views that we need, we have the client side view, at least for the MVP. You demoed that out last lecture. This next time, in order to get a good MVP constructed, can you coordinate with the web server teams to go ahead and create views for the authenticated users to figure out to create effectively a login or registration page?
Yeah.
As well as a approval page for submissions. Let's start creating some custom views for authenticated users so that once you're logged in, you can see what operations, what kind of tasks a administrator role has. And right now, I think for the most part, that's approving the submitted images so that the client can then have access to them, right? I think, I'm pretty sure that's the only role that we've given to the administrators at this point, is acting as the agent of submissions, being able to do that approval process. So now that we have a server that can go ahead and support logged in users, and we have a database that can go ahead and manage that data, we need to have an end user kind of display so that it can actually be viewed. And so here you can use the same concepts you were using before in terms of what you're doing with your windowing system, but you can just move it for the authenticated user. And honestly, you could even do that as a web form as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be rendered by tkinter on Raspberry Pi, right? So the kind of administrative roles and all of the kinds of tasks that you'd want to do from the server side perspective would probably be best as a browser styled application. Because you'd log in presumably through some kind of web portal, and then you can kind of make any adjustments there and then send those new updates to the server, and the server can then go ahead and do all the approvals and whatnot that you need to do. So that means make sure that on your GitHub projects page, you move the client side tasks that you've accomplished and your the research page, the advanced UI, to complete it and assign those 2 new tasks as well. Okay, let's see here. For the image management system for Pod C, do we have Pod C here right now?
Yeah.
How is the progress on being able to manage images within inside of our Python environment?
So we basically, well, Anthony gave us a working demo to look at, but I don't have a laptop to do that on due to an unfortunate accident. But it is working. We do have a selection thing. There's a little bug that we have with like the images, they like get stretched out to full screen and it will make like the quality bad. But we're working on that. Essentially all we really need to do is like collaborate with like the other pods. Because the way we had it working is the images is stored on like the local computer. We would personally like it to have like the images stored on like some other like place.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
yeah, no, that makes sense. Coordinate again, so that's. We're gonna migrate a lot of teams now to the server side, and we need to start fleshing out our API in support of that. And since you've done a big amount of investigation in managing images, I want you to coordinate with the API team to flesh out an API for managing the images from the web server. 'Cause like you said, yeah, that shouldn't be done locally.
Yeah.
We should have our web server that is the gateway towards any kind of request that our client systems, our client kiosk has to go ahead and make. And so our authenticated users will log into the web server, manage all the data from there. All the client kiosks will then communicate with that web server to then go ahead and request data and be able to redisplay it back out. Okay. So again, update your current to-do and assign your pod a new to-do list.
Gotcha.
So let me actually see where we're currently at with that too. Okay, let's. Okay, so this is the current state of our project board. Okay, so let's see here. So for new assignments, let me make sure that this is all updated in here to make sure I have. So here, integrate web submission form with server. Project documentation. Pod 2, do you want to continue project documentation, or do you want to have that assigned to a new pod and work on a new task?
I'd still want to touch up on the documentation just so it's more organized. So it's like, I want to update week 1 with, because it says like to do for week 1, but I want to go back and say like what's actually been completed for work week 1 as well. So if it's okay for us to like at least have that for at least 1 more week.
Okay.
So I can make those.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to pod 3. Right now, pod 3 is working on the tutoring schedule, but we might move you towards the server as well so that we can get a fully integrated MVP built. So we'll talk more deep. So I'll put here TBD. So
Yeah, we're-
yes,
so, right now, we will figure out the general skeleton soon, so we basically have it yearly, but there are just some things which we have to figure out. And I believe once we have that, what will be the smartest thing to do is that each pod will work sequentially, not parallel on different endpoints for the API. Because it should be fairly easy to make new tables or update tables. It should be fairly easy to do new endpoints. So I don't think that the separation between API and database is a good thing to keep anymore.
no, I
And
agree.
just have one work. So if someone needs the a tutor scheduling thing on the back end, they should go forward.
Yeah.
But for that, we need first to like finish our skeleton build. And then probably, I don't know how self-explanatory the whole skeleton is or will be. But probably we need to have some introduction.
Right. No, you're exactly on point. We've got to the point where we've constructed things to a level where we can now have pods individually kind of add in implementations, but before we can do that, we need to integrate everything together. We have everything that kind of exists in their own little bubbles. And what would be great is if we can kind of get these together so that they coexist in a very bare bones skeletal form. So let's talk about what needs to happen for that to occur. We already have a Leap windowing system, right? So where does the data from the windowing system come from currently? Probably initially when it was created is being mocked up, right? So it's all just locally hosted. Is that correct? Which is fine. That was the intent. We were going to use mock data, but in order for our MVP build to actually exist, this data shouldn't be existent inside of the client Raspberry Pi. It should send a request to the web server to go ahead and get that data. We need this to be refactored to do that. So was that both pod 6 and pod 7 that had worked on those UIs? So at least at this level, then probably what would be best, pod 6 was the one that worked on was it pod 6 that worked on the main UI?
Yeah, pod 6 was made, we were just prototype.
Excellent. Can you coordinate to go ahead and migrate your current build to get your data from the actual web server instead? And then just go ahead and again, update your to-do task inside of the GitHub project board with that in mind. So you have the front end, but it's mock data. Let's start getting real data injected into it. And that'll give us our main view that allows us to select between 2 different categories that can then go ahead and then display to the kiosk. Okay, and you already have Leap Motion integrated with that. So this just doing REST calls should be it shouldn't be a big task. It shouldn't be a big to-do on that. Okay, from the web server perspective, you need to have, the web server is going to have to support those requests from the client, right? So what you're going to have to do when you go to try to get that data from the web servers, communicate with the team that's been building out the API to let them know what data you need to get so that they can create API endpoints for you to make calls to. Does that make sense? So this would allow our client kiosk to then communicate with our server kiosk. Major part of the MVP build. We have a database built. Do we have, and you have mock data in there at the moment?
Not much. There's only like that one SQL site.
What might be beneficial for the rest of the teams is if you can populate the database with fake data that has clubs and images and things so that you can start attaching REST endpoints, make requests for that and get it delivered to the client side.
We put that in like Python code. We have it as SQL queries.
Yes, because we want to see how that.
Okay, so we want a database that's actually populated with data so that as we build our system out, you can actually start making calls to the web server and start getting expected output. We have a login system now. So then the next thing we've already stated is that the login system has to bring to some custom administrator panel. And probably the only thing an administrator can do is, let's think about this, create new administrator accounts or like editor accounts or whatnot. So you have to be able to make more authenticated users, but you also are going to manage the submission forms, right? So we have the submission forms created. That has to get integrated to the web server so that that's actually going to the unified place. We need a view so that once you're inside of your authenticated user profile, you can then see what your options are, which might be submission form. And then any active pending submissions can then be approved. When it's approved, then that gets that updates the status of those images with the corresponding tags and the fact that it's approved, and then can then be delivered to the client side when the client side requests that. Okay. I think that defines, as we've talked about before, what the roles of a very like bare, skeletal, minimal viable product would look like, right? So let's just make sure all pods have been reassigned. Oh, I'm kind of out of time. But okay, so let's just make sure that all pods have been reassigned with a task and have an ongoing task that's going to support us deploying MVP by the beginning of next week, right? So pod 1, do you have a new reassignment?
Yeah, we're gonna work with pod 4 on getting the request form to communicate to their database, and then we're also gonna work on creating a GUI for this event.
Perfect, yes. Do it in such a way so that we can actually deploy something by next Tuesday. Pod 2, you're still working on documentation, correct? So we'll reevaluate next lecture. Pod 3, with the tutoring schedule, I would likely hold that in abeyance and communicate with the pod 9 to be able to go ahead, help and scale out and with some of the API endpoints, so that we can get that to be much more feature rich. Pod 4, we talked. What's that? No, I know. That's not the expectation. No, so what pod 9's role is going to be for this next week is education. I'm gonna send, and what I mean by that is, since you kind of architect the API system, coordinate with the other pods to support them for building out APIs on top of your system. Does that make sense? You're not responsible for generating all the endpoints. You're going to be the go-to expert for the other pods that need to build endpoints inside of your system.
Once we finalize everything.
Yep. Perfect. Pod 4, database. Gonna mock up some data so that the rest of the teams have access. Pod 5 will continue with developer environment support and Leap motion integration.
Yeah, we're also moving into looking at how it's gonna set up in the hallway. So we need like max distance of the cameras, doing stress tests for like palm location and everything. We're gonna figure out how we're gonna mount it on the TVs as well. So we can actually make those, yeah.
Awesome.
So I have a basic 3D print design ready, but I just gotta make some measurements. And we'll be able to print out the maps.
Pod 6, we'll figure out what kind of REST calls you need to make from the client side so that you can update.
Is that?
I'm sorry, pod 7 is going to do that. I'm sorry, flip those two. Pod 6 is going to work on the submission form view. From the web server's perspective. So from an administrator, we need to start creating views for the authenticated user, so that when you log in, you can have pages that get displayed for when you log in. Does that make sense? Okay. We will do a reassignment to the Scrum team so that the Scrum team doesn't have to have the burden. So we will find a new role for you and get a updated Scrum team with.
I think in our including the organization hub, but I also, I don't know if everyone else has, on the agreement, but we can also keep the Scrum Master and I can catch up on.
Perfect. Okay, maintain the Scrum Master role at least for the next week so that we can get the deployment of the MVP out. And then we'll switch the Scrum Master role. Pod 9 is now going to be like the domain experts for APIs. So it's going to help support all the other teams. So we're going to start building out the server. The room booking pod is making progress, and that's going to, yes.
Because, for the tutors, there one tutor for the student, like for schedule, like how many students, just one?
For,
For booking the session, we have to.
yes, just assume, yeah, yeah, for this instance, just one, and we can flesh it out more so. I would even recommend talking with the tutor, the stakeholder, just to find out what they would expect. And then pod C, we've already talked about what your, excellent. So all the pods should have new assignments. Please update the project board with your updates. And for those who are continuing, so documentation and Scrum team, like create a new task to illustrate the next set of kinds of, you've accomplished a week, so you need to move something to the to-do, so create a new task that is effectively the new assignment, which is the same as the old assignment, but with what the next responsibilities are. That way you can move something from your to-do into your incomplete. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
What was pod 7?
Pod 7, basic client side. Pod 7 is going to go ahead and update the front end client so that it actually integrates to the web server. So right now, all of the data that our front end uses is locally hosted. We want to start making requests to our server for that data. Okay, so
They're not.
Pod B doesn't exist anymore. So we go right from A to Z. Okay, so does everyone now kind of understand how we're gonna start to bring everything together so we can have an MVP built? Tuesday, we should be at that MVP build. Okay, we are dismissed. I'm way beyond the time that I'm allowed to have y'all.
Good job.